Hey everyone, Chat Sematary is back, as is Tim Mathews. Today we are going to be talking about the 2001 novel Dreamcatcher. Before we dive into that, though, I quickly want to thank our new Patreon supporter, Whitney Beeler, for supporting us for $1 a month. Whitney, if you're listening, thank you so much. And Tim, I know you and I have been texting back and forth throughout our reading of Dreamcatcher, and I expected that I wouldn't like some of King's books, at least a few of them. And this is the second one, in addition to the Tommyknockers, that I haven't completely liked. So I'm sensing a pattern with his alien stories here.
Yeah, I haven't read Tommyknockers, and I certainly have not read the extent of Stephen King that you have. But all of the Stephen King that I've read so far, at least, you know, even ones where I'm like, oh, you know, it took a bit to get going, but then it was really good. Or I thought it was really awesome, but it could have maybe done without this or this. Mm-hmm. This is definitely the first one that I, frankly, at times was outright angry at Stephen King for this existing. That might be pretty harsh, but it was such a tough read for me. And you mentioned aliens, like, when I saw that, like, I've seen the movie.
Okay.
Not a big fan of the movie.
A lot of people are not, from what I hear.
Yeah. But I was like, well, you know, sometimes the movie just isn't as good as the book. And when I looked online, you know, I saw a lot of 3.5 to 4 out of 5 stars. And I was like, oh, wow. I was like, well, maybe this will actually be pretty good. And when I read the basic synopsis, I'm like, I love alien stories, you know, big fan of that.
Yeah.
This is not my kind of alien story. And I think I've learned that whereas movies can be so bad it's good, I'm not sure books can.
I think it's a lot harder with books because of how much time you put into them. Whereas, you know, you can enjoy an hour and a half to a 2-hour movie, and once it's done, it's done. This took hours upon hours for me to read and for you to listen to the audiobook. So
yeah, 22 hours.
Yeah. When I was reading through it, I was a bit distracted and stressed out because I'm a little behind on my Stephen King reading, and sometimes that can affect how much I pay attention to or enjoy a book, just depending on, you know, what kind of state of mind I'm in when I'm reading it. But this one, I thought it was because of those things, and I was like, I know I've read all of the words so far, but I'm very confused. So I spent a lot of time being confused, and because of the fact that this takes place near Derry and it's this friend group and it goes back and forth in time, kind of like It does, I was like, oh, maybe this will be, you know, some sort of coming of age story. And then you see how the characters have grown up. And yes, it is that, but no, it is not done as well as The Body or It or anything like that. And I really just found that I was getting lost, and I don't know if it's because of the jumping back and forth, because at least in It, if I'm remembering correctly, there are dates, and it's kind of like, hey, you know, we're jumping back, and sometimes I would just get lost. But I also read that Stephen King was on a lot of Oxy when he wrote this, so that could be part of the problem.
Yeah, I read that too. Yeah, I think he apparently, in one interview when the book was coming out, was all excited, and granted he was probably on a lot of Oxy cotton at the time, but he was super excited specifically about doing for the toilet what Jaws did to the beaches. And it was a very funny quote, and I can totally see, like, that's what he's going for. But then in like 2014, in an interview, he was just like, I don't like this book that much. Like,
and it's funny because I think he said something similar about the Tommyknockers, because he wrote the Tommyknockers when he had gone through rehab, if I'm not mistaken, and he was in a period of withdrawal. So he's had these extremes when he's written these 2 books that I happen to not enjoy quite as much as everything else. And I think with the characters you have, I do like some of the characters. So I didn't completely hate the book, because you have Gary Jones, who is Jonesy, Pete Moore, Joe Clarendon, who is known as Beaver, and Henry Devlin. And then you have Duddits. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not 100% sure, but
That's how they pronounced it in the audiobook.
Okay.
Which was actually read by, I forgot to look up his name, but it was read by Stephen King alum from Storm of the Century, actually.
Jeffrey DeMunn?
Yeah, I think so. So it was very fun hearing his voice, because it kind of like that. Honestly, that helped at times, because it felt so much in the Stephen King universe that I was like,
he has been in 4 Stephen King adaptations, so he's definitely in this.
Well, he was in Green Mile too, right?
He was in
Okay.
Shawshank, The Green Mile, Storm of the Century, and The Mist. The only one I haven't watched out of those is The Mist so far.
Ooh, that I do like that one.
I've heard the movie is much, much, much better than the TV show I have seen, but bringing it back to these boys, you see the 4 of them, save this teen with Down syndrome. So he's actually older than the rest of the 4 boys at the time, but because of having Down syndrome, he's a little different than the other boys. And for the most part, you get a sense that they have this unique connection with him, and you see that coming back throughout the story, and how Jonesy almost died because he had a vision of Duddits calling to him, and it's kind of this story that comes full circle in the end, because then it's like he's the one who might be able to save everyone. And I did like that part of the story, but there was just so much in between, and then they throw in Mr. Gray, who is taking over Jonesy's mind, and you have Owen Underhill, and it's just, they throw so many things in this to where you're kind of like, okay, this is a lot to keep track of. And like you said, he wanted the toilet to be the beaches of Jaws, and I didn't really get that vibe. I mean, I kind of did, but at the same time, it didn't seem as powerful as he intended it to be.
Yeah, like when he said it in the interview, it's like, and the basic factors of like how the alien operates, I was like, okay, I see that that's where you're going with. But in the execution, I mean, I have a really hard time taking any of the scenes seriously when it's just like you're describing in detail the smell and sound of flatulence, like every 5 words. It was this whole part that I felt like it went on forever, and I don't know if it went on forever, but it felt like it. And it was just like, it was, yeah, like I agree with you. Like I didn't feel terror from it. And for me, like the book, like it had that part of the story. And then I agree with you. I like some of the character stuff, like the connection between them and how that stuff comes full circle. But then you have the stuff with Mr. Gray, and then there's the stuff with the military comes in, and they, they're trying to get what they reference as the Ripley, as a reference to Alien. And constantly I feel like the book was trying to do too many different types of alien sci-fi stories all in one, and then mix in this coming of age story that he's done way better in other instances. And then he references so many other sci-fi movies and horror movies like Poltergeist and Alien. And I had a list at some point because I started making a list of the ones that he was referencing. It was just all these references, and even Pennywise is referenced in the book. And it's just kind of like, whenever those things were mentioned, I would get distracted from even the parts of the story I did enjoy, because I was just like, well, I kind of wish I was just watching or reading those things now.
Yeah, to go back to the Ripley real quick, it's one of those instances where you enjoy that you get the reference, but at the same time, like you said, he was trying to make this all of the different kinds of alien stories wrapped into one. And I feel like you either need to go one way or the other with it. You can't just have it all sort of tying together in these different ways and expect it to make a ton of sense, because it's not even necessarily that the story doesn't make sense as a whole. It's just there's so many other threads running through the story aside from, like you said, it being a coming of age story and it being an alien story and then the military's involved. I think if he would have stuck with the coming of age story and how they sort of had this telepathy going on, and then Mr. Gray coming in as the alien and taking over Jonesy, just those two things alone, it might have worked.
That sounds like a great book. That sounds like a good book.
But then when he brought in the military, I was just like, who are these people? I am so confused. Why is this Owen Underhill guy here? And
yeah,
like I said, I might have been just a little too distracted. But at the same time, I feel like even if I hadn't been worried about catching up on my reading for this podcast and had more time to spend with this book, I don't think I would have liked it any more than I did, because it was over 600 pages for the hardcover copy that I have. You said it was, multiple hours upon hours upon hours. And it just felt like there was too much in it, and I don't know how much of it we actually needed.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I feel like, for whatever reason, this was, the story he wanted to tell and was coming up with at the time. I feel like there's definitely like probably 2 or 3 Stephen King books that he could have, maybe like 2 or 3 Stephen King books that would be like 300-400 pages if he just picked certain aspects of this book and then focused on that. Like what you described, I would definitely be interested in reading. And if he wanted to do something that was more like his take on, I guess the even more gross take on The Thing, where they were, very isolated and trapped with this alien, attacking them from the inside, like, you can do that. And there's an audience out there for that kind of horror. But it just feels like there's multiple Stephen King books going on in this one, and that for me is what felt very distracting, because you had the timeline shifts, but then I just feel like the genre shifts were very jarring. And so then all of a sudden I'd be sitting there, I'm like, wait, what book am I listening to? Like, what?
Yeah.
I was like kind of on board for a little bit with something that was going on, and then all of a sudden the chapter would change and it would just be jarring, and I'm like, oh, now I don't know what's going on. And then it kind of ruined the momentum. And so I think that was something that really didn't help with the distraction, is just that it just feels very unfocused, and that maybe if he just was more focused on certain aspects, that he could have fleshed those aspects out, and then it could have been stronger, because I would have felt more in that world instead of kind of scatterbrained in this one.
And the downside is that he's usually so good at blending genres, because he'll do horror with a touch of science fiction or supernatural. He'll go all fantasy, but have sort of these Western kind of vibes in a lot of the Dark Tower series, especially the one that kicks it off with the Gunslinger. That's definitely like fantasy Western going on there. And with this one, it was just too much. And I think you can kind of tell where his head was at with this one, because it was quite literally all over the place. But I know we've said we did like some of the character work, but it's really the story and the plot that kind of kept us from liking this even more. So if you are up for it, I do quickly want to run through the connections to the other Stephen King stories, because I try to catch as many of these as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm down for that, because like those were things that, even amidst the distraction, something pops up and it's like, ooh, I know that reference. And I'm like, oh, I'm back in. All right, let's see where this goes. And
Yeah, and I had posted a picture on Instagram
yeah,
for the part where the plaque comes up and it's for the Losers Club and there's some graffiti saying Pennywise lives. And unfortunately, I posted that before you got to that point of the book, but it's not really a huge spoiler because it's just like this fun little tidbit that has absolutely nothing to do with what's actually going on in the story.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, look, it's my favorite part of the book so far. And I was being a little sarcastic, but at the same time, not really, because
yeah,
with how close in proximity this was to Derry, I was hoping something would show up because King is so good at that. And that was a big one that is kind of hard to miss, even if you've only watched like the TV miniseries or the movies for it. And then you have the catchphrase of the group, SSDD, which is same shit, different day. And that phrase was used by Red in the Shawshank Redemption movie early on in the movie. And, you know, I mentioned the Dark Tower series already and how that blends so many genres. And it often comes up in a lot of unexpected stories. And this was the one I didn't really catch on to right away. And I think it's because I haven't finished reading the series, because some of it is a connection to the seventh book. And, you know, there was something from the fourth book, which I recently read, and he kind of just slides stuff in there every once in a while. So those ones were easy for me to miss, but the number 19 is a big deal in the Dark Tower series, and that was used in this book as well. And then you have Eddie from the Dark Tower series. He's one of the main characters. He has a brother named Henry, and obviously there's a Henry in this. So you have just these kind of little quick things where you're like, oh, okay, I see how he's kind of just sliding these in there. And then there was a character whose last name was mistaken for Henried at one point, or Heinried, I'm not sure, but that's the last name of someone from The Stand, which is another book with even more characters to keep track of. So those are just some of the quick connections. Did you catch any of those other than the Pennywise and Losers Club one?
The Pennywise one, the Shawshank one, and I haven't read The Stand, but I've seen the old miniseries. That one, I didn't catch it necessarily like while I was reading. It was one of those like when it gets mistaken and it's like, oh, that's really familiar. Like what I know, yeah. I was like, I know that's something. And then when I was reading an article afterwards, I was like, oh, that's why it stuck out. And then I just knew a couple of the character things from Dark Tower because my old roommate is a big fan of the Dark Tower, and so he would just get very excited about certain things. So I recognized some of those. I wanted to get into the Dark Tower for a while, and knowing that that's kind of supposed to be the center of this, you know, Stephen King like universe thing, and he has a lot of tie-ins with stuff. That was something that I was hoping as this book was going on, when there were some of these kind of Easter eggs, I was kind of hoping some of them would, grow into something a little bit more substantial in the book and kind of like zone me in and connect with it. But they kind of just remained Easter eggs, you know, just on the side. But there's a bunch that I don't know.
Yeah, that will happen with me too, just because of how quickly I'm reading through these books. And I don't always have as much time as I would like, as I mentioned earlier, because now I'm diving into Black House, which is connected to the Talisman. And the Talisman was like 20 books ago. And I'm just like,
oh, wow.
I don't know if I'm going to necessarily, you know, catch a lot of these threads and remember every detail of what happened in the Talisman. It was one I liked, so I do remember, you know, the basics of the Talisman story. But when you have something that connects to something as big as the Dark Tower series, I'm just like, okay, hold on. He has like at least 10 books that make some other reference to the Dark Tower series. And I feel like the best way to do this, if you want to catch all of those Dark Tower references, is to read all of the Dark Tower books in a row, and then find the books that make mention of the Dark Tower series throughout them, and then read those. Because
Yeah.
doing it as I go, I'm just like, wait, okay, this book is tied to the Dark Tower somehow, and this one, and like I said, this book came out in 2001, but there's stuff that happens in the 7th book of the Dark Tower series that comes out years after this. And I'm just like, how does your brain do this, Stephen King?
Yeah, I did a lot better with catching, the other pop culture references that he fit into this book. I found my list of, he mentions Poltergeist, E.T., Fire in the Sky, The X-Files, Parasite, They Came From Within. Those were ones that I caught. I definitely see some Fire in the Sky influence, especially in some of the more disturbing parts of that movie. And, so I caught a lot more of that stuff. But I'm right there with you. Like, it's even just my old roommate like telling me stuff about the Dark Tower, and how he would tell me when he got to the end. Like, I won't spoil anything, but how he got to the end and would talk about something that was referenced there that was seeded so far ago, and it's like, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to see how, whether he plans that so far ahead or just while he's writing something, he remembers something from earlier on and is able to just kind of retroactively put it in there. However he does it, clearly as down as I am on this book, I'm still a big Stephen King fan, and still think he's an incredibly impressive writer and just creative human being. It bummed me out to not enjoy this book that much, but I'm certainly not by any means down on Stephen King, because even stuff that I really like about him was in this book. It just didn't all come together for me. But, now I just got to find another really good Stephen King book to read to wash this one out.
Well, the good news is he has many books. But in all seriousness, he does have so many books to where he has more hits for me by a long shot than misses. And the fact that I've read through, I want to say, over half of his books now, and there have only been 2 that I didn't really care for, I think that's a pretty good track record.
Yeah, that's pretty solid.
Yeah, so I know I mentioned to you that this would not be a super long episode because both you and I don't like talking too negatively about things. And I think,
right,
I sort of gave my constructive criticism for what would have made this a better story for me. And it seems like we're very much along the same lines. I ended up being a little generous with my rating, I think, given how much I didn't like it. I gave it a 2 out of 5, which is not great. But I felt like 1 out of 5 would have been like a disservice to the character work that he still manages to do. And I really do like when the boys come together and, they save the young teen with Down syndrome, Duddits, and you just get this sense of camaraderie. And I think that was probably one of my favorite scenes out of the book.
I'm right there with you. And I'd even though I probably sound more down on the book than you, I could agree with 2 out of 5, because the stuff that does really work for, well, I should say the stuff that does really work for me did shine really well. And that as well, like the relationships between all of them, at first I didn't find I had a hard time finding many of them likable, but I also feel like that was kind of the point. Like, a lot of them have traits that are not great about them.
Yeah.
But it was their relationship with Duddits and each other as it went on, that even though they don't all necessarily, it's not we all grow together and now we're good people kind of thing. It's still very rough around the edges type people, but
Absolutely.
But that doesn't necessarily make for a bad story. I do feel sometimes people are like, oh, this character was so unlikable, or he was a jerk and he was a racist, so this movie sucks, or this book sucks. And it's like, well, but was the character supposed to be that way, you know, and it's all about how the story connects with how those characters are and how the story's told with that. And it's in a lot of ways with the character work with them and Duddits, it did it very well. Yeah. So that's
No, I totally get what you're saying though. And the way this book starts compared to the way it ends, you don't think it's going to remotely end that way. And I'm not saying you should be able to predict endings when you begin a book, but they're like on this hunting trip and then they run into a couple of people and it just goes so awry from there. You're like, oh my goodness. Okay. This is a little wild how they get from point A to point B to finish this story because, you know, I kind of like to think of stories as like a winding pathway and sometimes you know, have to cut to the right, cut to the left. And then this kind of just felt like a tree with branches that end. And you're like, huh? What? Where are we going?
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing, because it's like, I haven't seen the movie in forever, but like the stuff I remember vividly from the movie was during the hunting trip. And so when the book veers away from that, all of a sudden I was just like, wait, was any of this in the movie? I have no memory of anything after that. And it goes quite wild. And, you know, something I should say is what's interesting to me is, you know, as I was listening to it and I was having a lot of trouble connecting with certain things and I was having trouble wanting to stick with it, reading up on it afterwards and trying to read some different analyses of it, because I was trying to understand maybe why it might click with some people. I know when we were texting, it was very much, it seemed to be the book was very hit or miss with people. So I was like, well, maybe why do some people find this to be a 4 out of 5? And, you know, there are some really interesting takes in like people that were excited about or did really enjoy certain horror elements or sci-fi elements and beyond what I did. And so there were times that I just kind of reflect back on the book and I start to think, I don't know that I'll ever revisit it, but I wonder, like, where did I miss it? You know, why wasn't this connecting with me? And that's always interesting to me with any kind of content. That is when I do try and, rather than look up a bunch of essays that just agree with me, it's like I want to know why people like it and why it didn't resonate with me. So if there's anybody out there who did listen to all this and you do absolutely love this book, I apologize for everything I said. And
I think it's great when people have differing opinions on books, because people can love the Tommyknockers, and it's like, I get it if that kind of story is your thing, and maybe it's just not my thing. Maybe I'm just not as big on these kinds of alien stories that King is trying to tell, because they're not exactly like E.T., and I have not seen any of the Alien movies, which I know is a ginormous disgrace to everyone probably listening to this, but they are on my list to get to, and I think it really just depends, because maybe it's something I enjoy more in a movie format than in a book format, and it is something that I won't really know until I watch more Alien movies and maybe read some Alien stories that aren't written by King.
Right. Well, yes, you should absolutely watch Alien. I've only seen the first 2 Aliens, and I will say I didn't see the second Alien until about a year ago. So,
okay,
you know, you're safe. My backlog is ridiculous sometimes when I've seen a lot of movies, like a lot, and even there's plenty of times where people are like, how did you not see this? So there's no shame in that.
Story of my life.
You've got everybody, you've got most people a run for their money when it comes to Stephen King books, so you can always drop that. But yeah, it's, you know, for people who really enjoyed this, that's awesome. And I'm super excited for you that you really dug this story. You know, I'll probably end up, I like I said, I don't know that I'll revisit the book, but I'll probably end up reading more about the book to try and maybe connect with that. I'm curious to see if I revisit the movie, what I think about that. But if this is your thing, awesome. And, it wasn't for me, but I do love a lot of different alien and sci-fi horror type things. So there's plenty other ones out there for me to be excited about and be positive towards.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for volunteering to cover this one, Tim. I know it was quite the task, and given that we both didn't like it, sometimes that can feel like even more of a task than usual.
We survived.
Indeed, we did. And I know you will be back on for another book or movie sometime in the future.
Absolutely. I don't know what it is, but I'm here.
This is why I have a spreadsheet, because I don't know what anything is without that either.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for having me. It's always a good time, regardless of the content.
Of course. All right, that does it for this episode of Chat Sematary. You can support the podcast on Patreon for $1 a month. You'll get a thank you on the show. For $2 a month, I will send you a Chat Sematary sticker. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at Chat Sematary on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You could also rate and review the show. That's a huge help. And as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.